Today's episode of the Golf Intervention Podcast is made possible by the premium content subscribers on the Golf Intervention Substack. We would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. You make it all worthwhile. You can also subscribe to our free monthly newsletter in the same place, and that's www.thegolfintervention.substack.com, or click the link in the show notes. And welcome back to the Golf Intervention Podcast. We're excited you're tuning in with us tonight. We have a very special guest, Dr. Mike Kay. I know Robbie and I have been talking about this for a while. And so why don't you tell the listener a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do. We're going to turn this episode into a Q&A. We would collecting questions from our listeners. And I think it's going to be an awesome and insightful episode tonight. And we're excited to learn from you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to be on. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's always great to talk to Robbie and Eric, first time meeting, but looking forward to chatting. So, so I'm a PT by trade. That's what's, I guess, the initials after my name. But I work out of Scottsdale, Arizona, but travel back and forth with my partners out in California with Helix Golf, with Tony Greco and Chris Walkie, through like Helix Golf. But I guess that's kind of like what I do is I'm biomechanics, PT, sports performance. I guess I can fill a lot of roles depending on what is needed, or what's like who's in front of me. Like today I was in the clinic all day and it was a couple pitchers. I mean, I've been kind of crazy busy with off-season baseball stuff, and they're winding close to getting to reporting. So that's kind of been my main focus. But like my day-to-day was chronic jaw pain, regular person, chronic headaches, regular person, and then the guy that's got a pitching tryout for the Yankees, and then a couple other like right after this, baseball. Yeah. So I get
just a day in the life.
Yeah,
right?
I get the and I say this like affectionately, weirdo headache stuff, and I get baseball, golf, rotational sports, and so you can kind of one day I can be on a driving range or pitching mat next to a pitching mound, or the next day in a clinic all day. So I just kind of can fill those roles. That's kind of, in a nutshell, who I am.
Super cool. Well, so I think for this, again, my background, I think we met, was it now 3 years ago?
That sounds about
Because
right.
it was at least 3, because we're at Mark Grace's place for a little bit. But that day I remember, because it was at Mark Grace's, it was the most like mind-blowing 4 to 5 hours that I've ever spent, because the interventions were all very, very unique to what I was accustomed to at the time. They didn't necessarily look like golf swings always, right? And so they were very sort of specific and targeted. And that was the main thing that I was really curious about when leaving. Is like, man, every individual is getting something tailored to their specific structure and who they are, right? So in the context of golf intervention, we're going to bring you some things that are really just going to get you thinking. It's not our goal for you to leave this episode having 4, 5, 6 things that you're going to take out right away, because that's not the purpose of this podcast today. Our podcast is to get coaches and you, the player, perhaps looking in a little different place. So going back to the last 2 episodes that we've done, probably by the time this comes out, you'll have already listened to the one that we just did on just the context of when we address swing, right? So it's probably for a lot of golfers pretty far down the line, but I would say it's an intervention that across all skill levels is just going to stack the deck in your favor. And that's what I love about what you do, Doc, is it's giving each golfer their best chance of those skills lining up, right? So as we kind of get into these questions here, the first one that I want to talk about is those individual structures. So when you look at a person, when you got somebody coming to you for the first time, what are some of the things that you're assessing? What do we need to be aware of as humans that says, okay, well, why do I not swing like my buddy? Right? So like, what are the differences that we need to be aware of, and maybe some of the constraints that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah. So I guess like full disclosure, my mentor, Bill Hartman, who's out in Indianapolis, created a model where we could sort of bucket people being either a wide or a narrow, and then there's a lot of intricacies that go into it. We don't need to dive super deep into it, but basically to me, it's like, this makes complete sense. It's just your shape and who you are as how you push in the ground, and your structure is going to determine the access to space that you can move it, right? So that being said, it's like, you take a look at someone and you say, I guess so if you take the spectrum of like John Rahm versus Justin Thomas, right? Two very different looking human beings, but pretty effective, pretty efficient golfers, right? So but they're both going to move the club differently. They're going to produce force differently. Two human beings, but two very different animals. So like, I mean, golf's interesting in the way that like that's a pretty far spectrum between one shape of one individual and the shape of another individual, versus like if you walked into like an Olympic swimming, like went to go watch an Olympic swimming event, pretty much when they put their caps on, is like, shit, I don't know any difference. Hey, these people, they all the same, right? Same thing, kind of. Maybe there's some differentials sometimes in the 100-meter, but like so golf is such a game that where you can span the spectrum of shape and of individual, where you necessarily wouldn't see that if you're walking through like the Olympic Village. You're like gymnast, pole vaulter, sprinter, or whatever, right?
Like on a football field, right? The offensive lineman, defensive lineman, you know who they are. Like the wide receivers, you know who they are.
You can accidentally think that slot receiver is an offensive lineman. Otherwise, maybe it's like 8-man football or something.
Yeah.
For sure.
So when it comes to the wide versus narrow, can we talk a little bit more? Because I've had questions about like, if you're a huskier golfer, like it has nothing to do with that, right? It's just more like the skeleton itself. So like, can you talk just really briefly about what we're looking at when it comes to wide versus narrow?
Yeah, I mean, essentially like the structure of their you can like it's easier to measure it off of their rib cage. So like they're more of their lower rib cage, you can get an idea of what their shape is. That's usually, if I have a wider rib cage person, I'm going to be biased more toward that wide rib cage position is going to be biased more towards like an inhaled look, but the spine underneath it's going to be more biased to an exhaled representation. So it's like you get these two compensation things happening off of one another. So you get a guy who's wider, tends to be a better force producer, right? They push force in the ground for a longer period of time, more like a greater amount than someone say that looks like me, or looks like Justin Thomas, or looks like a marathon runner. Those guys are going to have greater access to the ability to what we would consider probably turn than a wider individual, right? So, and that's just the determination of their structural shape. So someone who, again, who's like maybe a little narrower is going to have a greater ability to access like external rotation. So maybe space away from midline, away from the ground. So that'd be more like an inhalation bias versus someone who's wide, who has that's the challenge. It has like an inhaled looking lower rib cage, but actually, actuality, they're exhaled, right? So they're going to have a greater ability to create IR, force more down towards the midline. And so they won't turn as well. So like, and maybe simpler way to think about it, you get a denser individual versus someone who's less dense.
Yeah. Would it be easy to say like, okay, if like you're a wide versus a narrow, if you were to place your bets on who'd be better at a vertical jump?
Yeah,
Right,
I mean,
would that be...
you'd see different types of representations, because you could, all things being equal, both could create the same impulse. So because there's a very certain time constraint with the vertical jump, right? So the narrow might not create the same amount of ground contact time, but have the same 32-inch vertical jump, where the wide could still have a 32-inch vertical jump, but they're probably going to be on the ground for a longer period of time. Until it becomes, right, they hit the time constraint and they can't, and now they lose the energy production, the stretch shortening cycle, or lose it's the position of the guts. That's driving that sort of thing. So it's kind of an impulse thing. Yeah.
And then how, like, is it kind of what you're born with? Like, how really can you see that? Like, can you see that in kids? Like, if a kid's like 10 years old, like how well can you see, oh, that kid's going to be that kid's a wider?
Yeah, you are what you are. Like, there's some people out there who are kind of not, they're just not educated on the model, and they start spouting off about it, but they'll say something like, this wide turned into a narrow. That's just never what happens. It's just, you just can't, you can't outrun your DNA, how you literally, how your cells spread in the embryo. So that's just how it works. A narrow can compress themselves to such a degree that when you put their hands on them, they look wide. But essentially, this is a bent rib cage. You're not taking into account the turns. When we look at something, we try to look at something with put your hands on someone. People think about like it being like a flat representation, not understanding the actual turn that's going through the rib cage to get that certain presentation, right? So it's. I mean, I've got 2 little girls. My older one is like right away. She's a wide funnel, like pushing the ground. She's a force producing monster. I've got a narrow kind of dancery, kind of can't stay on the ground.
She's just floating up out.
She's floating everywhere, right? So it's like you see it, right? And it's a spectrum too, right? So you don't what I tend not to see in clinic or probably with like if someone throws 98, 99 miles an hour, they're usually not very average. So you don't really see this sort of like average representation of a rib cage.
Right.
You see maybe some extremely narrow with some like limb things and then a big twist through the rib cage, or you get this wide person who's got a crazy twist and they can produce force, right? So it's, average people don't throw 98, jump 40 inches, right? Run sub 10-second hundreds.
Yeah.
But that's the cool thing about golf is very average people can have 175 mile an hour ball speed because I'm not reliant on, because I got an implement that actually is going to be my connective tissue for me. Right.
Yeah. We're definitely going to get into that. So kind of as we take our time through this, I just want to make sure that image of wide versus narrow, everyone's really as clear as possible on that. All right, Eric, did you have any questions?
I was just curious about the interaction with the student and the instructor and you, Doc. Like when you're working at the, with golfers, are you assessing them and telling them, I think you're a wide, I think you're a narrow? Like how does that work, and how does the communication work with your team on that?
I mean, between Chris and Tony and I, or if I'm consulting with like Robbie or some other golf coach, I will, that communication would be there. With the player, it's more like, hey, it's more, you're doing X and we think you would be better off if we pushed you in this direction, right? Right. And it's more likely too. It's like Robbie seemed to work. It's not necessarily like even speaking much to them in general. It's like, here's a kettlebell. Can you do this for me? Right. And just all I want you to do is feel like, let's say all I want you to do is feel the inside part of your right heel when you're doing this. And then it's a simple cue and the takeaway, but I look at the person and say, this guy is on the wide side, right? On the wide spectrum. You look at their face structure, size of their butt.
Yeah. Like the jaw, maybe like the width of the jaw can
with
be
the
maybe
jaw,
a tell.
Yeah. With the jaw, you can do certain things where you have them do a toe touch or have them cross their arms across their chest. And you can kind of see sometimes where their rib cage is. And a lot of times people again, it's not necessarily like you have to, like a very wide person is very obvious. Very narrow person is very obvious. Everyone else in the middle, it's like, all right, I'm just going to have to play around with a little bit and see how much access to, let's say, internal rotation they might have. So by, like how much heel can I expect them? How much access to the depth of the backside of their heel can I actually expect them to have? And it's just this trial by error or safe to fail experiment, right? I think that's the interaction with the player and the coach is like plenty times, like coach, PT, whatever, or anyone who interacts with a human being, we expect to be able to just give something and walk away and be like, no, it's your problem. And that's just not the way it works, right?
Right.
You deal with complexity. So it's not.
Yeah. I was curious about the communication, because I always feel it's tricky to put someone in a box and say like, hey, you're this and you should do that. And I try to stay away from that personally, right? Like I think there's some other teaching methodology that sort of puts people in boxes and says, you should do this, it's your thing. And I think that belief system can be hindering to a student at time. It can be limiting, I think. And so I was just curious how you all it sounds like you don't communicate that way, which is awesome, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. I think that's the problem with a lot of, whether it be, I don't know, whatever assessment you're doing, I don't care. Like you can do, some days I'll just be like, I'm just gonna look at toe touches today and say, because you can tell kind of where this person's center of gravity is. And or standing rotation versus seated. We could talk about all that stuff as we're interested, but it's not. Yeah, we're trying to figure out it it's like examples like for like shoes. X company spent millions and billions of dollars for R&D in shoes, and they'll take an imprint of someone's foot, and they'll say, all right, and then they'll find the shape of their foot, right, and then they'll just they'll make a shoe that just relates to the shape of that foot, like they're just matching where his foot is in space. They're not taking into account that's like, do we really want his foot there all the time, or do we need to start leaving it
Right.
right?
Mhm.
It's like just because I rotate to the right really well, and what is well, and I can't rotate to the left, that doesn't mean that now like that doesn't mean that like, okay, that I need to be certain X type of turner. You're
Yes.
just seeing them where they are at time and place. So then if you continue
Yeah.
to teach them and coach them into this perspective, now you've got this ball rolling downhill. So you don't really have like a true
Mhm.
sense of ability to like see the picture. You're just coaching.
Mhm.
And there is something about coaching them where they're at, but you need to understand of like, all right, where do I need to go? When is this gonna, what's the future look like here?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So kind of moving on to kind of our next question, I think that gives everyone a really good kind of foundation of like, okay, like wides versus narrows and understanding that it is your skill. It is your, like Dr. K said, it is your DNA. Like you're not getting around that. Right. I think that's a huge constraint that we need to kind of consider early
And
on.
we
on the
don't
path.
really know how adaptable you are until you try certain things, right? So some people can be relatively can access different space that someone else can, right? And you can have a wide that can fool you, and it can access certain spaces, and they might like that's what someone says like that wide swings like a narrow. That's not a thing. It's just that's the wide accessing his space where he has it like he's using. So we're just not looking at the whole system and how they're
Mhm.
bending, twisting, getting into that particular shape.
So can you talk a little bit about, and so this is something that we talk about a lot on our podcast, is the importance of rhythm, right? So it's one of the things that across all shots, across all skill levels, it's one of the things that's just going to, like I said before, is going to stack the deck in your favor as best as possible. So do you see rhythm differences between wides and narrows? And then I want us to really get into understanding what good rhythm is. Maybe a good place to start is, what is good rhythm to you? What are the differences that you see when it comes to wides versus narrows? And then we can get a little bit into like cueing it, fostering it, kind of things that you like to see to get someone to swing with a little better rhythm.
I guess I would ask like, how do you guys define rhythm before? Like, how have you defined it in the past?
So in the past, right, it was very, before learning from you, it was very much more of like this holistic, like very non-tangible, like, oh, does it look like they're exerting themselves a lot, or does it just look easy, right?
Yeah.
And before learning from you, I never really had a tangible way to get someone closer to that. It was more just like this very generic, like, oh, just relax. Just like, like it wasn't anything really substance behind it. Whereas now I understand like, hey, there's a phase of the backswing where we're creating energy. We need to capture that energy, and then we need to yield to that energy. So like that sort of like sequence of like creating energy, capturing, yielding, is kind of what I look at now. Is like what's a golfer's ability to capture what they create, and then how well are they yielding to that? And this is what I'm really excited to have Dr. Pryor. And if you haven't listened to the Dr. Pryor podcast, please go back and do so. It's game changing. But a lot of his stuff, I think, is so good at creating the environment for yielding. And so for me now, it's less about just like the overall time. Although I think time is a really good cue. Like you could have someone say, all right, like, is the general time of backswing roughly matching the general time of the entire downswing and follow through? And if they are, it's probably a good tell, but it's not looking underneath the hood enough. So I don't know how, if you can expand on that in terms of what good rhythm is to you, differences that you see between wides and narrows, and then kind of ways that you like to cue it.
Yeah, I think so like rhythm rhythm is one of those things where if you dive into it, there's obviously a lot of complexity with it. We should be able to, like, what Dr. Pryor does and what I do, what we do is we should see some commonalities between the two. Like there should be like simple rules that kind of would work and I guess foster principles in both fields, right? So the way I would look at it, I mean, is access to relative motion. So can I move one segment of my body relative to another? And I'm not even just necessarily talking like, I don't know, wrist to elbow to shoulder. And we're talking between like segments of bone. Can things move relative to one another? Because if I have access to relative motion, I have access to sensation. If I have access to sensation, then I have access to time and space and where I'm at, which is going to foster probably a better rhythmic relationship with myself and this thing that's way away from me that I can't see, and I need to feel, right? So I guess the analogy too would be if I put a quarter in your hand, right, and I just told you just to squeeze the hell out of it, you couldn't tell me what's in your hand 10 seconds ago. Okay? I'm not talking about like how much you should grip the club because I know people get upset about grip pressure, those sort of things. I don't care.
Yeah.
Grip it tight enough, please. That's all here. Don't hit me with a golf club, please.
Yes.
But it's so like these access to relative motion, right? So like if I can, that's going to give me the sensation of where I am in space, right? If there are points in time, right? So as I'm fostering speed and getting back into like downswing sort of stuff, where points in time where or at the top of my swing, probably even way before that, where there is no more relative motion in your golf swing until we unwind and untwist again. But like the other analogy I'll use all the time is like, I want line in the reel prior to hitting those moments in time where there's no more relative motion. Because then I get the appropriate twisting, periscoping, the lengthening of the connective tissue to allow the golf club to travel in a more effective manner. So then it's like that, I mean, like that's rhythm, right? And it becomes, you do that over and over again. Guys and girls basically start to learn like, this is how I step on this thing. This is how I can control this thing. This is how I can, can hold the face, let go of the toe, whatever I need to do, depending on it. But all of those are going to be anything related impact downwards is going to be related to me creating the balance and the sensation and the control prior.
Yeah, exactly.
So like related to the difference between your shape and your rhythm, like you're probably you're going to see narrows that have more access to like ER. So, and hand paths that are a little higher to steeper, right? And then wides are going to be a little more, if you're on their helical angle more, right? You're going to have a hand path that's flatter, not as vertical and relative to something else to their shape. So they're going to be, so the timing differential is going to be different.
Yeah. So from a geometry perspective, that makes a lot of sense. What about from more of like the time element? Because one of the best analogies that you use is of a half pipe, right? So, can you talk about that half pipe? And then is the half pipe a little different for wides versus narrows in terms of how much time you have to really create that energy into the club before you then capture and yield to it?
Yeah, for sure. So like, if you think about the structure of a narrow, they're all things being equal, going to tend to have greater verticality. If everyone knows what a half pipe is, right? Like a skateboard half pipe, or they're going to tend to have the greater verticality of the walls of their structure. And that kind of goes along with the shape of their pelvis too. And there's idiosyncratic differences in each narrow and each wide. And I can create bends and twists in this thing too, right? So like you get all sorts of things, but like in all things being equal, I've got this narrow with like this vertical pelvis, and then the bottom part of their pelvis, it's called like their outlet. So like the backside of their pelvis where their sacrum is going to be smaller, and steeper, and the differential is going to be less there. So as if you picture yourself like a little skateboarder man in there, as you come down, it's like, I'm going to have to ride the wall down, and I have to push and kick back up out of this thing pretty quickly relative to the shape of my outlet or the bottom part of my pelvis, versus a wide who might not necessarily have the verticality of the walls of their like their ilium or their innominates, but they might have a greater bottom part, like so they've got more depth in the backside or bottoms on their pelvis, right? So then they're going to have a greater ability to basically hold that IR longer. So they're going to be, less, I don't know if I would call them double limb jumpers versus single leg jumpers for the narrows versus wides, but
Yeah.
like they're going to have a tendency to maybe hold the ground a little longer. Whereas a wide, in order for them to create the turn, they're probably going to use a little more vertical ground force, ground reaction force to get out of the way.
Yeah. So if you got a narrow and you see them way up on especially the trail foot, like way up on the toes of that foot, and you're like, oh, wait, no, I believe that's not okay. You can't play like that. I'm just going to try to nail your feet to the floor. If you're doing that with a narrow, probably not a great idea.
Yeah, it depends, right? So like you think about like how does the narrow eventually kill himself, is that they lose their ability to hold on to IR for a little bit longer, and then that heel breaks the ground really quickly, and then they go toey, right? So then what they end up doing, like I imagine if you think of your like think a narrow, I think we all think of a narrow who's loses his heel really early in transition. And he may have had disc issues or like whatever, because they would have disc issues, that type of stuff. You're going to have to create a yield somewhere. I'm going to have to slow down somewhere. So i.e. disc, first med head, my neck, right? All these things that's going to keep me from getting pitched off the front of this half pipe in order to create this turn to come back around. So it is their superpower, but it's the thing that you want to make sure that doesn't like using still a Bill Hartman line. Hopefully it doesn't kill them. Right.
Yeah.
Versus a wide, right?
Yeah.
Who gets kicks early, right? Or gets buried and continues to use this kind of like, I don't know, David Duval-y right side bendy holds. Like that's going to end up bending stuff that you're not going to want to bend, that you can't unbend over a period of time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, speaking of unbending, can you talk about the importance of breath, when you use it, how you use it, and then how can we use breath to our advantage?
I like that you use it as an unbending thing. That's cool. That's a good set. Yeah, I mean that's like that's how you change the internal dynamics, right? So if I need to increase my density, I exhale and I squeeze, right? If I need to decrease my density, inhale, I create more space, right? So that's how we internally shape change. And that's how, like, let's say I was working on someone's, I don't know, like someone's pec, and I'm trying to get more expansion in the upper part of their rib cage. I'm going to use techniques that doesn't twist and bend them. I'm going to use techniques that creates the tiniest bit of stretch, and then let them use their breath to untwist them, right? Because that's what's essentially going to happen. Like we'll hear from a lot of models that a breath is like, it's a pump handle, it's a bucket handle. And those are terrible representations of what's actually happening. These are three-dimensional untwisting. When I take an inhale, I'm going into inhale, and I exhale. It's like this. I'm getting these 3D. I'm getting multiple planes of motion, all at once, right? So if I can get someone to use their breath as a way to sort of create a focal untwist of something, or to create an expansive, or to create more external rotation, or to slow things down, right? Probably Dr. Raven stuff, right? It's like, that's how you create more external rotation space. That's how you create more time. You want to slow things down really quickly, make time stop, right? Or make things really speed up. I'm sorry, is then you make things very dense eventually. But yeah.
In breath, as far as I'm aware of, it can be a very technical thing. It can be something that's not a given, even though we're always breathing. A lot of times we're unaware of it. It gets us into some bad habits. So what are some of the things that you've seen, like, absolutely do not try to breathe like this? And then some things that you would maybe recommend we think about when trying to breathe a bit better.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for someone, that comes in to see me, like I put them in an advantageous position to take a breath, and that might be on their back, a 3/4 position on their side. It depends on where they're at. I think like not to get like a whole load of stuff but belly breathing is usually a pretty poor idea. Right. So when you belly breathe, all you're doing is basically creating like a expansion out in front of you, and it squeezes the top part of your cage downwards.
Yeah, you can feel it. It's like you get compressed like right around here. Your belly goes out, and then like everything else up top just gets squeezed. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah, you don't want to spill your guts over the front of over the pelvic rim. If I spill the guts over the pelvic rim, I am going down and forward with that stuff. Right, where the point is to when I take an inhale, my lungs to drop, my diaphragm to move, and to push straight down to the pelvis to create like a pelvis that can actually receive the guts, right, which allows space to build up to the upper rib cage. So when I'm standing and talking in normal breathing, when I take a breath in, the air is going to bias to fill the bottom part of my rib cage. You do that over and over again. A lot of us then end up getting compressed. We have a hard time getting the air out of the bottom part of our rib cages and getting it to expand to the upper part.
Yeah.
So like putting you on your back or on your side or in a slightly inverted position can bias more upper rib cage position. So like you can put your hands kind of in the soft spot underneath your ribs here and take an inhale after sitting, and you should feel like you get this 3D circumferential expansion. You get the 3D circumferential expansion, that should hopefully translate to the upper part, upper chest, upper back, to stand you up. Because that's essentially what air does. It stands you up, right? If I can't get air to the top part of my rib cage, I start getting pulled down, 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 down.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can't get up off the ground again.
Which has implications on the half pipe, right? So like
Sure.
if you have a very, I'd say, suboptimal breathing strategy, I would imagine that the bottom of your half pipe is just going to get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to where now you don't have any time to apply force to the club with relative motion. And just to make sure that the listener is clear on relative motion, right? So a good tell would be early on in the backswing, if you can look at the feet, essentially the heel and the base of your big toe. If you see those points of contact basically leave the ground, right, early on in the backswing, then you're not using relative motion, right? You're basically changing orientation in space. So what we're talking about is this first part of the backswing, right, from really before the club starts moving to about, what do you would say, about like shaft just past parallel, like that first parallel position in the backswing, essentially, right? That's kind of our window that we're talking about to really put some energy, some force in this club. And we want to do that without losing relative motion, without taking our whole body and just like changing orientation in space. We want to have access to that. So if you're not breathing well, right, you're going to limit your ability to hold those relative motions while the club is being given energy back. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, like your ability to take a full inhale, full exhale is going to be representative of me being able to move my body effectively through space. They're representations of full body, what we should access to full motion.
Yeah. So what do you see issues in that first part? So like from setup to, again, club handle maybe just outside your base of support, like the trail thigh. It's like, what are some ways people get it going in a way that allows them to really capture that effectively versus not? Like, what are some common things that you see in that early phase that we could start to be aware of? And just, again, not getting to like, again, whys and errors are going to do it differently. Or just talking about like common themes that you tend to see more often than not, if any. And again, if there's not, then I would believe that totally. So
yeah, no. I think like, especially the early before the club has even started to move, I see too many people that can't unweight their right side prior to it. So it's like whatever it is, 55, 45 left versus right, but the ability to unweight my right side, what that does is it then allows me to move into my right side. It sounds kind of silly, but it's biomechanically really effective. Because when I unweight it a little bit, it allows me to kind of essentially like drop my guts down to the right, front of my right. It gets the connective tissue beginning of this kickstart of this club. So like getting people to understand that sort of that unweight, that sort of, tuning mechanism prior to taking the club away is a big deal, because everyone's so static and afraid to move around before they hit a shot. But like you look at any great ball striker, and it doesn't matter if it's golf, baseball, whatever, as they are fidgety, they're moving around before they hit the shot, because they're trying to get, whether they know it or not, they're trying to set the right internal pressure in their systems before they start taking the club away.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, but you need access to range of motion and space in order for that to be able to do that. That's like, you get someone on the table and they've got, no access to any relevant motion, then they're like plyo step, they're getting the club moving away is like everything moving all at once.
Yes.
Right? So they might unweight, right? But it looks like, you're like, that doesn't look good,
No.
And then they say, well, I can't, like, it just becomes like, well, guys shouldn't unweight before they take the club away. But it's because he doesn't have access to the differential in relative motion in that early part of the takeaway. So you just have someone who's either set up from a posture position that's way too forward. There's nowhere else for him to go. But like that is gonna basically, it's the domino that if you can get someone to do that well, that everything else becomes what they typically say is so much
100%.
easier. They're like, wow, you show them on video, like, wow, that was I'm not diving down the ball 2 clicks off of it. And, and you like perceived effort is significantly less. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's plenty of models or golfers right now talking about like tension is your friend, tension, squeeze, tension is your friend. And I'm not disagree. Does it works? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But like that strategy is going to dry you out. It's going to cause a problem over time. So like that's just the kickstart of the domino. Like it literally, like it's like how you throw the yo-yo down into your right foot. If you got a yo-yo, starting to throw it down to the right foot. Like if I have to become a little bit unstable, and it'd be okay with it, and then catch it. Right. And that's what gets the club going. Yeah.
And there you go. Again, that goes back to Dr. Pryor, because so many people aren't willing to give up some control, right? To feel like a little bit of out of balance, right? They say, okay, this thing has got to work out for me or else.
Yeah.
Right. And that little sense of being okay and letting the outcome play out and being willing to see how it plays out without a guarantee is so huge. It takes, because I'm a big believer that the tension starts in the brain. Like concentric muscle activity starts in the brain, right? It's the golfer squeezing down on this club and saying, okay, I'm going to exert my will on this golf shot. This golf ball is going to go here because I'm not willing to accept the outcomes when it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, what you are doing, and it's so cool how, have you ever met Dr. Raymond?
No.
It's so cool how like you guys are going at complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, sure.
It's like totally coherent. Like it's 100% coherent. And that's what I love about it, because totally, like when you get people plyo stepping for the first time, when you get them breathing, when you get them, and oh my gosh, we could talk about grip, like putting your hands on a club. That could be an entire podcast. But like when you give them some space, when you allow them to plyo step, a lot of times they're like, oh, I feel like I have no idea where the ball, I feel like I would never do this on the golf course because it feels completely out of control. But then you look at the club head speed and it's jumped about 5 or 6 miles per hour and the strike dispersion is even tighter. You're like, well, what is it that you're really trying to control? Because the old adage of like, hey, you got to give up control to gain control. Like there's a little bit of truth to that, I feel like.
For sure. I mean, that's my least favorite word in the PT strength and conditioning world is stability. It's we could just get rid of that piece of jargon word. It's a useless word, because it's just, it doesn't, it's a lack of understanding of that. I literally, for me to put my left foot out in front of me, I have to become incredibly unstable to get there. I have to give up control to get there over and over.
Yeah.
Knowing that I'm going to land and create a moment of stability and then continue to move through space again. But it's like these moments of impulsive force but having to let go as I walk through space. Like a lot of people I see, especially with chronic headache, neck, jaw stuff, like they've been given chin tucks and glute bridges for like 5 years, and they
Good
walk
Lord.
everywhere, and they squeeze themselves to death as they walk, right? So their locus of control is like they have zero. They try to control everything. They have no control at the same time. So
Right.
yeah,
The more they're trying to control it, the less.
the worse they feel, right? So it's like the harder I squeeze, that becomes a problem.
Do you think at some point we coach that out of people in golf? Like if you go back to the old timey swings and look at them, like they've got lots of action pre-swing. Like go back and look at Jack Nicklaus in the 1950s and look at Bobby Jones. Look at all these guys with how they moved and turned, and then all of a sudden it was kind of like, I think we went through a period of time. Like I've been teaching golf a long time, so like we went through a period of time where, I don't know if we tried to turn everybody into a computer model or something. Like there was this like, mechanical overdoing of the 2D analysis or something. And then all of a sudden we lost like that athletic, motion that we used to see back in the day. Like when you watch the forward presses and the leaning left right before they drew, like all the foot action, it kind of felt like it went away for a long time. And now it seems to be coming back. So like, it seems like it's coming full circle, but I don't know if you had any theories about how maybe golf instruction maybe had coached that out of people for a little bit of a time, turning them all into robots or something.
Yeah, I think it's the old like be still old adage, right? Like I mean, I think for sure. You look at long drive guys, right? That's where it kind of became back in vogue.
Mhm.
Long drive became popular again. People were doing their rock steps, and wow, these guys are hitting it further because they're doing it. Like golf tries to consider itself such an insular thing, but then you look at, I mean, before a high jumper takes off, they're rocking, they're moving, like all these sort of things. So yeah, we tend to think of this thing as different than everything else, and then then that becomes issues. It's not different than it's just the context of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think like the athleticism at some point in time kind of was, I don't know, removed or discouraged, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of add on the components of like like the force, like I don't know, like you look at like what Bobby Jones or some of the older guys were doing, right? There maybe wasn't a premium on hitting ball like a mile
Right.
at all
Correct.
costs of everything else, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, the maybe the relative force, what they were swinging, it allowed them to feel and be a little freer in relationship to be when we coached some of that stuff out of guys. I mean, now it seems to be coming back in vogue, but there's so many pockets and corners of styles and methods. So
Yeah. True. Cool.
All right. So working our way up. So we went from before the club starts moving. Now the club's moving. Right. And it's moving for a second and a half to 2 seconds. It's all done. Right. So, can you talk about really what are you referring to when you say capture, and then what is yielding? Right. Because really this is the basis of rhythm, that we like to coach. So, what's a capture? What's a yield? Right. Would be a good kind of intro to that.
yeah. So if you think about like the example of unweighting and then sort of like weighting or pushing into the ground again, like I would consider that to be like a capture. Like I'm capturing the force now. So when I pushed into the ground, then the energy or the predominance of the force is coming from the ground up as I get going here, right? If I got that nice, like maybe yo-yo-y, connective tissue-y, yielded kind of feel, then when I push in the ground, it's like the yo-yo, the rubber band, I don't care what version of elasticity you want to talk about, it gets accelerated and then pushed up, right? So I don't have to squeeze and pull it to the top. Now I've got physics, I've got Newton, I've got ground reaction forces on my side. Different types of shapes and sizes, narrows and wides. Like I'm expected to see a greater differential between the unweighting to the weighting, maybe in a narrow versus a wide, just because of the shape of the wall that they've got to get up, going up through, versus someone who's wide. And then you have to think about too the relative position, like a wide, they're already, they've got like an internally rotated bias pelvis that the moment they push in the ground, they're getting things, they're going to get ground reaction forces right away. Versus a narrow might take them a little more time to move through this very like ER biased pelvis to an IR biased pelvis to get things. So these are the kind of small differentials time that you would see. So the capture is this thing getting popped and caught, and now I get a position of my pelvic outlet and like my insides, my guts up. So they're in an advantaged position now. So now that they are essentially almost like floating for a little bit. So as I begin to then superimpose like a turn on that, this turn now becomes a much easier turn. I'm going to now start moving into like this. I'm in a biased of like a yielding representation. I'm turning back to my right side. So guts are up and I'm twisting and now pulling them up the top. Like depending on like your shape, like you'll see guys that will like literally start like unweighting at left arm parallel, right? So guts get up. I've rode them up and now I can actually start to unweight a little bit as I go. It's important to know is like this is again, like the time again where I have to be okay with letting the gut club travels. My guts are still going up, but my body essentially is moving away from them. So it's like this another moment of like letting go, right? It's like the top of the roller coaster.
Giving it up.
Let it go. I don't want to run, or I twist and roll with this thing forever, right? And it's now I roll off my right foot, and now I've got to do I've got to do what you guys seen, I'm sure, on gears all the time. It's like the amount of work that even like a 2 or 3 great club player does in relationship to a touring pro, the amount they're trying to undo at the top of their swing versus what like a touring pro just close. There's not enough time to undo what a typical, even a single digit is doing versus a touring pro.
Right. The analogy that you've given me that's been really, really helpful is the understanding that the club becomes the leading resistance, right? So you move the club, and then it's like I'm just trying to think of like a good analogy. Like it's like you're pushing a kid on a swing set, right? You've pushed them, the child's moving towards you. There's got to be that time of where you're gathering and capturing that child moving towards you. And you're kind of yielding to that child. If you're too stiff, right? If you block that, the chain's going to get all like wonky. It's not going to be a fun experience for that child. But if you yield to it, right? And if you allow that momentum to then move you, that's a much different scenario, right? So it's literally, and we've talked about this, I think, with Mike McLaughlin 2 years ago. It's like, if things are set up in that first part, like literally, you can basically just go like lights off, like not have to try to do quote unquote anything once that club kind of picks up momentum, right? That's like ideal, like pie in the sky, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's like, we all make swings where it's like, wow, that club felt really balanced. I knew exactly where that face was the entire time. Right? And the reason you know where that face is the entire time is because things are in balance, right? It's like, I've got the appropriate amount of yielding so that I'm getting feedback from where this thing is the whole time. And then I can tug on it and I can tune it, because that's what we see. It's like, it's not like these guys are doing the same thing over and over again. They have enough noise that they could deal with this noise, that they can tune this thing as it comes down. It's a privilege to be able to tune, right? Like,
you're talking about functional variability, Dr. K. Come on.
That's a big functional variability. I like that.
I love it. No, that's literally what it is. Like, because they're so skilled, like they're aware of the club. Like they know where that club is.
It is a privilege to get to do that, right? So we think like, but you want to take someone's ability to tune, then twist them like a pretzel, right? Dry them out. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's the, like, like we can, like, it's the, like people start talking about like fascial lines, and like, to me, it's inconsequential. It's like, fascia covers everything from your toe to your liver, right? I can draw any fascial line with all due respect to anywhere I want. It doesn't matter. But fascia is a sensory suit. So if I twist myself over and over again, lose my foot contact, have to bend my helical angle in like a way to get the club in a certain position, that stuff dries out. When that stuff dries out, then I lose my capability for sensing where this thing is. Then I lose my capability for tuning. I lose my capability for tuning. Then I'm a freaking robot.
Skill.
Yeah.
Skills out the window.
You're gone. Yeah. Right. So like, it's talk to great players when they're on a roll. It's like, man, I feel like I have so much time through the hitting zone, whether it's a pitcher, hitter, golfer,
Yep.
right? Like hit a golf pitcher will be like, man, I get to front leg strike and it's like, I can literally, like, I can hold the ball. They could pick a seam that they want to throw off of. A golfer can talk about how they can hold the face, they can turn it down, they can do whatever they want to it.
Totally.
But that again is, I had the ability to like tune as I came into this landing position.
100%. And there's been a lot of research that has actually shown, because we talked about skill, I think 2 episodes ago, but the things that separate a functional shot and a dysfunctional one are objectively incredibly small. Like differences in quarter of an inch of impact spot, differences in half of a second on the clock in face to path variability. So what we're seeing is that the best players in the world, and the research has shown, is that they're not organizing those skills the same way every time. There's variability in these very small amounts prior to that release point, prior to impact, to get the outcome consistently inside their dispersion of what they're trying to do. They're not doing it the exact same. So this way, like, golfers want to be consistent. Well, no, you don't want to be consistent. You want to be able to tune, right? You want to be able to be aware of where that face is relative to the task of the shot that you're trying to hit, right? You want to be able to tune the speed of the club relative to the shot that you're trying to hit. That's a great word. I'm going to start using that, actually, tuning, because that's what we do when we do skill development. We say, okay, can you create a rhythm, right? And then can you get the face a little open to the path, a little close to the path? Can you hit it a little out the toe, a little out the heel? And we're trying to facilitate this skill. But then what happens is they get on the golf course and like, oh, this thing's got to go my way. Like, now I've got to clamp down and control this. And then they lose access to their skills. They can't tune anymore.
Yeah, and so like my job from how I can, interact with the players, I would like to give them the greatest access to relative motion that they could have available, right? Because if they have greater relative motion, then they are typically good at, and they're up practiced, and they have got a coach that can, like they've got all the other stuff on board, then typically they're having a greater chance to create space and time to tune. You can take someone's range of motion by literally putting them in a hallway. It's like if I crowd you and I take away your space, it's like you're gonna lose extra rotation.
Is that why when we see people hit drivers indoors, oftentimes they swing slower?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, you lose extra rotation space. ER's fast.
That's what it is.
ER speed, right? ER speed, and like if I crowd you and I take away your extra rotation space, lose the ability to produce velocity. So do it, but I imagine you're going to see a lot of like compensatory IR bend.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I see people swing change dramatically when they go outdoors to indoors, especially with driver. It's weird. Like pitch shots and iron shots can be kind of similar, but for whatever reason, when you get a driver in people's hands indoors, it's just a freaking mess.
Yeah, I've been teaching indoors for 2 weeks, and I have hit basically no drivers with students for that reason. Almost none. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now we know why. Thanks, Doc.
It's a representation, like range of motion we try to think of as like, because I'm tight and I can't move. No. It's a representation of behavior. It's a behavior, right? And you may have like the spectrum of a behavior where I can move in and out, right? But for such an open environment game as golf, I want to give you don't know this until you start messing with people and seeing in individuals, like what their access to space is and how much they need in order to play well. For a hitter, like a very time component thing, I'm going to squeeze them pretty tight a lot of times. For a golfer, it's like, I'm going to stay away from the trap bar deadlift on a lot of these guys or these things, because it's all I'm doing is stealing relative motion that I might need, they're going to need eventually, or they will need.
It's awesome. So cool. All right. So we've got some listener questions. Have you still got time, Doc?
I got.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. So the first one is a really interesting. So Hunter Brown asked, what are some of the potential ramifications of some of the more popular trends in posture and setup strategies over the years? So, there's a good example would be like, all right, so you get somebody on force plate, right? So here's their feet, right? So sorry for our podcast folks, but I got my lead foot, trail foot, lead foot's flared out some amount. force plate data showing that the lead side vertical is peaking late, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to take that lead foot and I'm just going to like square it off, right? So like for like when might that be appropriate, and then why would it not be, and then like some of the ramifications of that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so like, when someone, like if they let's say they ER their left foot, so they turn it away from midline.
Yeah.
Typically, it's to help them give a sense that they can clear their left hip so they don't get stuck.
Yes.
That's fair, right? And then, they can, it's essentially, it's a time saver, right? It's giving them more time. Whether, I'm always hesitant to tell someone to turn their foot away from midline, like turn it out to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I would do it in the gym for a very specific reason in order to capture like a joint position, but then to accelerate someone through that with a golf club, I think that's that's a thing that like can work for like 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden you look at them and you haven't seen them in 2 weeks. And now they've got this crazy right side bend. And you're like, where did that come from? Well, they had to slow things down because now they've got all this, they created a space open this direction. And now they're squishing out that way. And they're essentially trying to hold on to it to a longer and longer degree. And just because I ER my foot or IR my foot, like in this case, let's say I turn my foot inwards, right? It doesn't mean that I am turning the tibia inwards either, right? So it's like I could then now create like even a bigger twist. So let's say I've got like a front part of my shin, my left shin is turned out away from midline. So I've got what we call like a very externally rotated proximal left tibia by my knee. It's turned away. So just because I turn my foot in doesn't mean that my tibia came in. So now I've got even
you just create a bigger twist.
Yeah, now I've got an MCL problem really soon. I've got a left SI joint problem coming really soon. So it's tricky, right? It's not like, tweaking one little, it's like you could tweak. That's the thing about dealing with complexity, right? It's not a hierarchy, it's a hierarchy where any small things can change and have a huge consequence of what we're looking at. So, but then it's like, if you've got a good coach's eye and you look at that and you're like, and you don't just look at ball flight and a TrackMan and you say like, all right, like, yeah, path is better, but look at that right side bend. Look at what he's doing from his right. Look what his right foot's doing now. Is that something that I want to see perpetuated over a month period?
Yeah.
You have to see. Right?
Yep.
I'm not saying do it or not, but I think it's something you have to manage. You can't just be looking at one piece of data from it.
Totally. And then like, what are some of the, I guess getting off topic now, but off of that question, but like, what are some of the things that just as like a coach seeing players come in and out the door, like I think a big part of our job is injury prevention, right? So what are some things that you would want just like the masses of coaches to keep an eye on when it comes to preventing injury, if there's anything? I know that's probably a loaded question, but
I think like the majority of injury is me creating force from like a position away from midline. So it's like I'm trying to create force from an ER position. So I move away from midline a lot, and now I created this external space to move into. And I'm not saying it's good or not. I'm just saying it's space. That's the only thing you can do is move into space. But now I own this space, right? So now you push down into this space. So, like from looking at, it's like, all right, let's say I got a guy, who can't turn unless he rolls out the outside edge of his foot. But all well and good, but he's unless he can recapture that foot in time and get himself to turn back and left, he's still got to push in the ground. And if he's going to push in the ground from an ankle sprained position or rolled out position or bent foot position, he can still push in the ground with a lot of force, but we have to realize where it's most likely coming from. And that's going to be more of like a spine push. So then I push hard down from a top down position, and then I have to create another big yield quickly somewhere else. So, you can get this kind of disky type of connective tissue type yield. So preventing injury wise, like, I look at that type of stuff, for, things should be vanilla-y, right? Kind of boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I see like, any wild side bends and twists and things like that,
It's a cool rule of thumb.
I think that's a decent way to look at it. Like you're gonna,
It's like the smell test, right? So like if you just see something and you're just like, nope, that doesn't look right.
right. Things are
There's probably
we
something
want
there.
things to be distributed, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying like when people talk about the spine side bends and twists and does all those things. Yeah, sure. 100%. But that's also why we have arms and limbs and stuff like that to distribute these crazy side bends and twists and turns that you can do. Just because you could do something doesn't mean you ought to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I want to distribute it.
100%. And then just kind of going through, definitely want to get to this one. What are your thoughts on overspeed training?
Overspeed training? Like,
Yeah.
um,
We won't mention necessarily the companies, but like different weighted clubs that you're gonna swing.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. I mean, I guess it becomes who, what, when, where, right? And that would be the only issue I ever have with any of this stuff is that, and I don't expect them to talk about this, but it's like, what's the negative implications of using your training, right? And it's easy for me to say because I'm not talking a training aid,
Right.
but like that would be my thing is like, all right, what is going to cause a problem and what doesn't? Because you don't hear about this and no one talks about what happens when I say I have a weighted club as my speed training thing, right? So like think about have you like if you look at someone like if someone's squatting with like maybe like with chains on the side of the bar, right? Like could be a really, really useful strategy. But what it's doing is it's increasing my time to produce force, right? So if I increase my time to produce force over a period of time, that when I take the club away and I move it, it might give me a greater ability to produce force for a period of time to bend this club in a more effective way, just create more velocity, hit the ball further. But again, it's like, when does it become too much? And then what are the strategies that are being used in order to create the velocity of the bends, right? If the shaft, if it's, you're going to have to, in order to turn this thing around, I'm going to have to squeeze my axial skeleton in an anterior posterior position harder and harder and harder in order to turn this thing around. If I can pop out of that, that's how I create velocity, right? So I go to the top and I squeeze. I've got some videos that I took. It was kind of interesting where like I fully loaded up a club and made some swings. And then you could kind of see like how squeezed everything is all be in my rib cage and skeleton.
Yeah.
Right. So I squeeze and stop because that's how I stop. I have to make myself like a rectangle to stop. Right. But then in order to pop out of that, you have to expand pretty quickly. Right.
Yeah.
So as long as you have the ability to expand, squeeze all you want. Like I would love people if you could trap Ardella 405 pounds, you can move it off the ground like that. Awesome. Right. I want you to produce force, but when you have to then continue to squeeze through the velocity component or the turning component of this force, then we have problems. And then what's going to be your indicator that you've overshot your speed training, right? This isn't like a golf. It's not like, let's say this is my spectrum of capacity of, right? If I go to, and I swing at 116 and now I swing at 124, it's not like I just went like this, right? I had to go like this to get over there. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have to give up something on the other end of it. Everyone talks about that. Oh, I got more accurate when I swung harder. It's like, sure, but like, can you control a flighted wedge at 80 yards anymore? And if you're a 10 and you don't care, that's fine. But if you make a living playing golf, that's a pretty important thing.
Yeah.
So not good or bad or negative.
Just context
positive.
dependent.
It totally is. It's just
who, what, when, where, why.
Yeah, I think there are much more efficient long-term ways to go about getting speed gains in people than just putting a weight on a golf club and having them do it to get that. Right.
Just say rip it.
Yeah. Well, I want like it's like anything else. It's like, I was watching some of the YouTube series of a guy trying to increase his club head speed. And he goes and sees these amazing instructors and people, and it's all they do is talk about is like, you need to produce force earlier. you need to produce more force, or you need to but it's never this conversation about like, look at the human being that's in front of you. He can't produce force earlier. Stop jamming his knee further into the ground. He can't get out of the ground. He's stuck in the ground. This guy has got a top of his rib cage that is so compressed. There's nowhere for him to push up into. So if he tries to unweight, no wonder he can't straighten his leg.
It's just bouncing back down.
He just gets pinned, right? So you can have him try to push hard and squeeze her, but he's going to push from a tibial femoral position that you're not going to want. And let's say he bumps to 180 for a month. Like, all right, because it's such an ego thing, you're not going to maintain that. So it's just the pure ego thing, so, but it's not, trending the direction for a 3 years, 4 or 5 years of that type of speed.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the other thing I would say, right? Are people maintaining their speed with this type of things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the moment they stop, is it gone? Right.
And that's where I say, like, hey, you've got to get through 18 holes.
Right.
Got to get through 36 holes, right? A lot of folks got to get through 72 holes.
What is their,
so what's the strategy?
Yeah. What's their mode to recapture that, right? Like the range of motion you have on hole 1 is totally different than what you'll have on 12.
100%.
Do you have strategies to recapture during the round? Are you adaptable enough to capture the further round? So those are all really important questions.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got maybe just one more. Let me get back to my notes here. So the last one I thought was a really good one. This was during our Substack from Chris Blackmore, if you remember Chris from our previous Code Breakers events. He's like, what are some things that we would likely see or common ramifications when someone's posture doesn't match their ISA? So maybe beforehand, like let's just hard to do, but like real quick, just talk about like posture, likely differences in someone's posture from a wide to a narrow. And then if someone's not accessing that space, what we would likely see, like ramifications of that.
Oh,
I just asked you a 30 minute question.
That's a deep one.
5 minutes. There we go. Perfect. Yeah.
As I do have a pelvis here. Not helping the podcast, but
yeah.
So wider's gonna have more space. Like so sacrum, right? Or a side view.
Yes.
Wider's gonna have more space. That's gonna be more of their sacrum look, right? You can see that I've got a center of gravity that has a greater chance to move down and back a little more.
Yeah.
Right. And back being relative, but down at least. Right.
So from the side on view, this would be like very traditionally, quote unquote, like S posture look.
This would be like a sacral nutation look. This would be an S posture look. This is where this gets screwed up all the time. That's a great point. Right. Because I could have that and
you
that.
could be,
and look where my spine is, right? So this is relative motion. And the sacrum doesn't necessarily move that much, but this is relative motion. So this is, but if I have a lower compression in strategy and I've got a sacrum that's nutated and I turn this direction and it's like, oh, he's got right, all this sort of things. But so this is this is your rudder, right? So like your wide is going to probably have more access to the backside of their pelvis. So you're going to see maybe a little more, you're going to see more of like a vertical shin presentation for them at setup. If they have access to relative motion. The problem is you might take a wide that doesn't have any access to relative motion. You're like, you need a vertical shin position. Well, how are they going to do it with their center of mass like this? Then they just arch harder from their back to try to push their shins back in position.
Yeah.
Right. Versus a narrower guy who's got more of a sacrum that's kind of here, right? They're going to have a shin position that's a little bit more, like a little more positive shin angle. They're going to be a little more vertical. They just don't have the same access to internal rotation that a narrow or wide would have more access to internal rotation than a narrow would have. But you can see like the narrows, then they going to have more greater access to like external rotation, ability to turn, versus a wide will have more of an pelvis.
So fair to say wide's a little hingier, narrow's a little bit more of like a sit.
Yeah, these careful of the word hinge. Doesn't mean anything. Because I could show you a way a narrow would hinge and a wide would hinge, and it's like, and it wouldn't be the same, right? Like they could access the same 3-dimensional space, but then the narrow might be doing it through a lot of lumbar flexion. The wide would be doing it through like a different, like a sacral position, different, like a lumbar position. I would just
So it's
say
really
E-yard or
the main
IR
thing would be
position.
the shin angle.
Shin
is
angle, you're
not
looking
the
at chest,
biggest.
like, and how like everything else, chest responds off of that. You'll tend to see a narrow with greater access to like mid back expansion than a wide. A wide might have more of like a pump handle or like expansion in the front of their chest space. But yeah, that's what I would look at, that type of stuff.
So if let's say you've got a narrow who has a very kind of more of like that vertical shin, is not really matching kind of their ISA, what would you tend to like? What are some of the ramifications of that?
I think because it's a tough question, right? Because it's like the narrow, this narrow might have access to internal rotation enough to have a more vertical shin position. So I'm going to look at like maybe the bias of the weight in their foot, right? If they look like they've got a good IR representation of their foot in the ground there, that maybe they have some access to this space here. This is like, I guess, the challenge of, again, saying a wide versus a narrow setup. Because you're going to see idiosyncrasies. You have to coach this and look at a foot and look at a shin and because all these other things that are going to go into the interplay of how this person sets up. That's, I think they're trying to, I guess, differentiate this from, say, like any other golf model or system. This puts a lot more onus on the coach to coach and see the segments, see everything, versus just, again, say like, this is a narrow, this is a wide setup. All things being equal, wides will have greater access to internal rotation at setup. Narrows will have a little higher center of gravity. So they'll have a greater access they'll be in more external rotation at setup. What that looks like up and down the chain is going to be related to kind of those positions.
Would you tend to see a narrow center of pressure at setup, like closer to like a little bit more forward, like just inside the balls of the feet, maybe?
A little forward.
Yeah. And then wide would be a little bit more.
They're going to have, a little more, a little deeper, right? So then, that's the greater my ability to do that with relative motion is going to be my greater ability to then access the deeper part of my heel while maintaining my first med head. Because it ain't just rolling on, squeeze it on the back of the heel and letting it go. Right. So that would be the differential, like, of a wide versus a narrow. But I like the foot pressure if you got access to that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, got anything else?
Got nothing else. That was awesome, though. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What
answered any questions? But
you did. You were great. Why don't you tell the folks where they can find you? You have a Substack, right?
I do. Yeah, I do a Substack with my partners, Mike Camperini. It's context driven.
Cool.
Substack. Yeah, we do a kind of a weekly post on all sorts of stuff. I'll be doing more golf here coming up. Putting together some like golf athletic development stuff, speed programs, and then we'll be out in South Carolina probably here.
Yeah.
In a month or
so then I'll use this opportunity to plug Codebreakers Retreat. That's going to be February 24th, 25th at the Cliffs at Kiwi Springs. We still have spots open. Our soft registration deadline is coming up January 24th. So please do us a favor if you plan on attending, register prior to that date. No pun intended. But it's going to be Dr. Mike K, Helix Golf Institute with Tony Greco and Chris Walkie, as well as Dr. Raymond Pryor. So it's going to be a really fun time. We hope to see you there. Again, thank you, Dr. K, for all you've done and all you've shared with us. It's going to be a lot of fun to keep exploring.
Yeah, I appreciate having me. Thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to continuing this series on swing exploration next time on the Golf Intervention. Have a good night.
Peace.